Hey, it's Broderick. We've got a new style of WoW TCG deck tech we're doing today. This will be a classic deck from 2019. It was the Reborn Indianapolis 2019 tournament with Woodrow Hood got second place with this deck. Pretty cool creation here. He's got Blythe the Pyromaniac. This is an undead fire mage. This is a mid-range deck with both aggro and control elements. Our main game plan is to outvalue or out-aggro our opponent in the mid-game with Anub'arak and Deathscrounger graveyard recursion into very timely interactive spells. We have cheap one-sided board wipes, universal removal for all card types in play, and counterspells or interrupts as we call them in WoW TCG. This deck tends to draw and discard many cards, so it has a decent chance to find the tools it needs against the opposing deck. Some games are going to play a long aggro control with cheap threats, interrupts, and removal, while you have a long-term graveyard plan that's building up. You'll also have games where you spend the early turns trading cards, drawing cards, and discarding cards until you've put together big threats with big answers, often in the same turn. That's usually in the form of a graveyard threat that was free to put into play, plus a really cheap one-sided Wrath, plus a counterspell to back it up. Now the engine of this deck, there's three main cards that serve as the engine that really get us through the rest of the cards and make this thing work. The Ring of Blood, the Warmaul champion, this is a quest. When you place it, you mill yourself for 3 immediately. So hey, you get 3 cards in the graveyard. Maybe they're helpful, maybe they're not, but at least you're going to get like a volume of cards in there. And some of the cards we use, like Anub'arak, you just want to have lots of cards in the graveyard, and this is a pay 0 way to do that. It's also not really something your opponents can really interact with. It just happens. They can try to interact, but they can't really counter the quest by most commonly played cards. We have Grazzle Grubhook. This is a 2-drop 2/2 goblin. He's basically Merfolk Looter from Magic, but with haste. So he can immediately come into play and loot, or draw a card and discard a card. Most of the time, you want him to last. You don't want him to die. You don't want him to get hurt in any way. You want him to just stay in play so he can draw you good cards and continue being an engine that fills up your graveyard and accelerates this deck's game plan. We've also got Bottled Knowledge. This is a pay 3 equipment. Comes into play, you draw 2, discard 1, and then you exhaust a mage, which you could use your hero or an ally. You also have to do this on your turn. But you tap a mage, sack the bottle, draw 2 more, discard 1. So overall, we're going to see 4 cards after we cast this, and then we get to dump 2 cards in our graveyard, any of our choice. So it allows a lot of flexibility, and it's card advantage. It's just card advantage, and it works well in the graveyard, so it's one of the best engines for us. It lets us get through our deck and sets up our future plays so that we can have some really smooth turns. That's really where this deck starts to turn the corners, when it's doing a lot of things for very little mana. Looking at the threats of this deck, this is a mid-range deck, but it still plays a little differently because we're playing essentially 8 Magic the Gathering creatures that are aggro. They can't help trade. They just can't. They can only go face the whole time, which doesn't normally indicate mid-range, but with the type of angle we're going at here, we've got some cool tricks. So for Jadefire Scout, just an overstated 1-drop that's super aggro. He also combines really well with Monstrous Frostbolt Volley because he's only 1 mana. So we can just pay him, pay 1 for the Scout, pay 3 for the Frostbolt Volley, and that's a 4 mana sweeper, and we get a dude in play afterwards. The Deathscrounger just keeps coming back and heavily benefits from our graveyard synergy. He also comes into play at 0 mana cost that we can Monstrous Frostbolt Volley for free. Like, we don't have to cast him and then cast the Frostbolt Volley. We can use all that mana for something else. You've got Broderick's. He's simple, he's efficient. You throw him in the graveyard, it's just free damage for the rest of the game, or you play him early and trade into your opponent's stuff and then keep eating the rest of their stuff. So much value off Broderick. He makes sense. That's why he's in most lists that are red. We've also got the Phoenix. The Phoenix is a recurable threat. It's an interesting card in this list. We don't have a lot of ways to recur it. We basically have our hero flip, and we talked about that earlier. The Phoenix also has the role where it can come into play, kill your opponent's tokens if they're 1s, like if it's a Weldon or something that's significant there. It has 6 attack and 3 health. 6 attack makes for a really big Monstrous Frostbolt Volley. Probably the best card in this deck, next to Anub'arak. Those two always hold their weight. And Phoenix is recurable, so it's the kind of card that I usually just throw in the graveyard, and there's a chance I can get it back later with my hero flip if I really want to. It's also a monster. It works with Deathscrounger, so we had to hit a certain number of certain types of allies, and this just has lots of benefits. With the fact that most of the deck is better than Phoenix, and sometimes you just throw it in the graveyard and don't worry about it. Sometimes you play it as a big 6/3 that keeps pinging your opponent's stuff and enables some big plays. And it's card advantage, right? It's just a card you throw in the graveyard and get it back. That's what Phoenixes are typically for in card games, is card advantage and aggression. And the biggest threat we have here is Anub'arak. 6-drop, 6/6, Protector. He's unique. You can only have one in play at a time. He has basic, or non-instant speed. Pay 2 and remove 6 cards from any player's graveyard from the game, and then just put Anub'arak into play. So it's not a cast ability, so if you're doing this out of your graveyard, opposing counterspell decks can't even counter him. He just comes into play. You can use this effect to eat up your opponent's graveyard if they have synergy, or if the game goes long. It's just a free 6/6 Protector, sure. And we also enable this pretty quickly on our own. If you have like a turn 1 Ring of Blood to flip over 3 quests, or flip over some crap in the graveyard, and then on turn 3 you play Bottled Knowledge, discard 2 more cards plus the bottle itself. Maybe turn 2 you have a Grazzle. There's all these graveyard enablers, and Anub'arak is really the big payoff there. He's great in the long grindy games. He's great in the aggro games because he's a protector, and you can usually get him out for cheap, and then you can start to do that over and over again. Like, they finally managed their way through a 6/6 protector, and you just do it again next turn. Again, he also has 6 attack. He works great with Monstrous Frostbolt Volley. A great turn 5 play is to pay 2 for a giant 6/6, and then pay 3 for a one-sided Wrath for 6 that also hits the opponent's face. It's like, you did a lot that turn, right? You 6'd their board and their face and put a 6/6 in play. Very swingy turns. So those are the threats. You've got a variety of cheap, aggressive creatures, a lot of graveyard synergy, and some high-end finishers with some inevitability. Okay, moving on to the interaction. We are playing Mage, so we get the most universal interaction. Between Spell Suppression, Miniature Voodoo Mask, and Rituals of Power, you can really interact with any of your opponent's permanents that have annoying powers. So ongoing abilities and equipments are the big ones here. Some others will come into play too, but being able to, for 1 mana, basically just turn off any of those problematic permanents that you did not interrupt. Allies too, like a Dadak, being able to silence him, if that works. I think so. Being able to silence them could be huge for this deck. Baxtan Herald of Flame is insane. The 3-drop 3/1, you always have a Mage, so he's just 3-drop 3/1, and he's like a fork bolt for 3. So you get to split 3 however you want, or just put all 3 in the same person. He combos really well with the Hero Power. The Hero Power is just a free deal 3 to something that was dealt damage already. So you could Baxtan something for 3, and then flip your hero and do 6 to something. Just really take over control of the board. You can Baxtan plus hero attacks from Broderick to finish the board off. You can Baxtan away a bunch of tiny little 1/1 tokens if you needed to get through some protectors. Baxtan's just really good universal removal combined with the rest of the tools that we have. If we're trying to go aggro, he can take out the opponent's defensive pieces and just let our 1-drops, our Brodericks, our Jadefires, and our reoccurring Deathscroungers keep doing their thing. Baxtan's a 3/1, so his stats aren't great, but he's got great trades. When he comes into play, basically starts to earn you back the board in your favor. And even if he dies later on, we just get to eat him up with an Anub'arak trigger or something. So it's fine if he goes in the graveyard. We also have the interaction. We've got some Taste of Arcanas, some Nether Fractures, and some Monstrous Frostbolt Volleys. So between all this interaction, we have the ability to interrupt our opponent's cards that are coming into play that we care about. Sometimes we have solid Nether Fracture for 3, or we have the cheap Force Spike effect from Taste of Arcana. And at worst, Taste of Arcana is either deal 1 damage or just become a resource. Or discard it later to one of our discard effects. We've got a lot of ways to grind through our deck in smart ways. Monstrous Frostbolt Volley. Let's be real, if you're playing this deck, this is really one of the reasons you wanted to try it out, because you wanted to make a monster-type mage that could use this sweet spell. Have you ever cast Corpse Explosion from a Death Knight, or had it cast against you? That card's nuts. It usually kills your board, leaves theirs alone, and hurts your hero, so like the race is on. And that's usually what happens here. Even if your opponent starts to get ahead of you and go wide, you clear their whole board and damage their face with just 1 card. And sometimes the ally came into play at the same turn, so your opponent didn't have a whole lot he could do about it, especially if you're the deck with counterspell backup, not your opponent. Monstrous Frostbolt Volley is insane, and one of the reasons you should definitely try this deck, or another Monster Mage, but this deck gets to basically have all the fun of a Monster Mage, while also have good Horde cards in it. Moving over to resources, we'll start with 3 Undercity. This is just tap or exhaust, then you can exile or remove an ally card in a graveyard from the game, and then heal 2 from your hero, who is undead. This helps us against any decks that were a little overly aggressive and we're trying to catch up against. Like maybe it took us a few turns to assemble a Frostbolt combo or to draw the right cards in the right order. Or maybe we are just taking early hits from like a 3-2 and we just didn't draw the cards to trade with it. And we're trying to heal back some of that early damage. Because maybe we're holding open counter spells and just getting beat on by a little aggro guy. So Undercity is good at controlling the enemy graveyard and also healing and keeping us in the game that we otherwise just wouldn't have any chance. This is a mid-range deck, so it's not like we're trying to make it last forever, but the kind of combos we have really want us to put some value combos in play and try to ride those to victory over time, and Undercity helps with that plan. Sometimes you have to eat your own graveyard too to stay alive, and it's better to not die. Rituals of Power is a real simple one. That's basically another spell. It's just silence a card for a turn. You could use this to turn off hurricanes or whatever, maybe Dadak if you want to silence him so he doesn't trigger and heal a whole bunch. A lot of ways to use that card. And we got one Draenei's Junk. It's just a draw engine. Pay 2, reveal the top 3, pick something that costs 1, 2, or 3. Rest goes in the bottom. So this dodges our Anub'arak and our Phoenix. We can't hit those pieces. Obviously you can't hit quests either, but it does hit basically every piece of interaction in the deck that is not a resource and isn't a Phoenix or an Anub'arak. So you're hitting most of the deck, getting a look at three cards for only 2 mana. It's great. It's kind of like playing Impulse for Magic. It's not quite the same, but you know, it's like Impulse on a land. It kind of works. Let's take a look at the hero. This is Blythe the Pyromaniac, an undead fire mage. If you control another mage, flip Blythe. Blythe deals 3 fire damage to target hero or ally that was dealt damage this turn. So if we have Brodricks in our graveyard and we're punching with our hero every turn, that's an easy way to enable this. We just need another mage in play. Now we have 12 mages in the deck, so it's really not that hard to get this hero power off. Plus the fact that it costs 0 is huge for the kind of tempo plays we can do either with Broderick in the graveyard, and we can smash in, get some damage, then flip our hero. If we have a mage in play, that's a big removal we can play for basically 0 mana. And it combos real well with Baxtan, who is already basically a 1 to 3 target removal spell, and our hero power can extend the range at which that 3 mana card can have a lot of effect. Now this hero power is also the only way that this hero can deal fire damage in this deck. Even though it's a fire mage, this is pretty much the only thing we wanted it for. Now the Phoenix card, the only chance for it to like recur or rebirth out of this deck is for us to flip our hero and deal 3 fire damage, because that's how you get the Phoenix trigger back. Now, you may have games where you just don't care. Phoenix is in the yard and it's going to get eaten by a Deathscrounger or a Anub'arak. But there are games where you may have multiple Phoenixes in the graveyard and you're not even going to cast them, or maybe you are going to cast them, but maybe you just want to recur all of them to put them into your hand so that you can have them as threats or just use them as resources. There's a sideboard as well. You could potentially update this. There's plenty of room to change this around, but we've got only 3 cards in it, 10 cards total. 3 Glacial Tombs. This is just put this on a guy, attach it, you can't attack or exhaust. Really cheap way to interact, and it also gets around aberration in case you're expecting a lot of the Alliance Hunters or anything that's Alliance-based and is using those allies that dodge your typical removal. Glacial Tomb is a cheap way to interact with any creature as long as you care about attacking and protecting, not its power. Brittilize does a couple different things here. When it enters play, you can destroy an armor. Again, we've got 4 copies of this thing. It's a 2-cost ongoing ability. When Brittilize enters play, you can destroy an armor. So it's good against the armor decks, which can put on so much armor that our damage starts to whittle away to nothing. You can also sack it once it's in play and shoot something for 2 and freeze it so it can't really attack. That's great if you're playing against creature decks and you need the ability to just kill their creatures, straight up just trades. Against armor decks, then you may be able to kill their creatures, but typically I feel like this card's just here to destroy armor, and then you also freeze them for a turn. So Brittilize is pretty annoying to deal with for any type of like Death Knight or Warrior deck. It just definitely means like you kill their piece and you slow them down at an inopportune time. 3 Burnaways. This is just simple. Destroy target ongoing ability. There's other ways to use this effect in your deck. Like we do have some spell suppressions, but sometimes you just want the unholy power gone and you don't want your opponent to have any way to get it back, and this is one simple way to do that for 3 mana. All these cards can also be found with our quest. The Draenei one that lets us flip 3. That's something to keep in mind when you're building your sideboards, to try and see if your draw engines in the deck can easily hit your sideboard cards, so you hit them more frequently. And that's our sideboard. Now, if you're playing Classic with us at this point, you probably know that we like to keep a little ban list going for official stuff like tournaments, and when we're testing decks for tournaments, we also obey that ban list, just to keep things simple. Anub'arak is probably one of the best cards in the game, and we didn't discover that until the game was really losing a lot of its population. But still, Anub'arak's been really good, and this is one of the decks that showcases that. If you're trying to bring this to one of our current tournaments, just keep in mind that I don't think Anub'arak is allowed anymore. He's been banned, just because otherwise he'd be kind of ubiquitous over the format. But if you want to see why he became good, this is one of the decks that really shows off the strength of one card when you build a deck around it, and just how solid that shell can be.